Ella adored her new house. Victorian architecture, high ceilings, a sprawling garden, each room whispered stories of a bygone era. It was her dream home. The realtor's smile, the paperwork, the keys in her hand. It all felt surreal. The first few days were a blur, unpacking, arranging furniture, discovering hidden nooks. The house hummed with a quiet energy, a comforting presence. Ella felt she truly belonged here. Alone. The house shifted. A heaviness settled on Ella's chest, a prickling unease. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, but expectant, like held breath. At night, the house creaked and groaned. Footsteps echoed on the stairs, though she was alone. One morning, she found faint scratches on the wall outside her bedroom, thin, shallow, like claw marks. Dismissing it as an animal, she painted over them. The next day, the scratches were back, deeper this time. Anxiety gnawed at Ella. She sought answers, researching the house's history. An old newspaper clipping caught her eye. It spoke of an asylum, once located on the same grounds, shrouded in rumors of mistreatment and despair. The historian confirmed her fears. "Some say the asylum's troubled souls never left," he said, his voice low. "They linger, seeking solace, or perhaps something more." His words left an icy chill that settled deep within Ella. That night, the whispers started, faint at first, like rustling leaves emanating from the walls themselves, then clearer, murmurs of anguish, of anger swirling around her. Sleep offered no escape, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and chilling screams. The scratches intensified, appearing on doors, furniture, even the floorboards. The house felt alive, a malevolent entity toying with her sanity. Fear became her constant companion. Driven by a desperate hope, Ella decided to investigate. She examined the wall where the whispers seemed strongest, tapping lightly. One section sounded hollow, a hidden room. Adrenaline coursing through her veins, she grabbed a hammer and chisel. The plaster crumbled easily, revealing a small dusty space. A chill emanated from the opening, raising goosebumps on her arms. Steeling herself, she stepped inside. The air was heavy, stagnant, thick with the weight of forgotten secrets. Section 6. The Rusted Box. This is a tale of mystery and intrigue, a story that has been whispered through generations, shrouded in the mists of time. The room was bare, except for a single wooden chest tucked in the corner. It seemed out of place, an anomaly in an otherwise empty space, as if it had been waiting there for centuries. Its wood was dark and aged, bound with rusted iron bands. The iron bands were thick and corroded, telling tales of time and neglect. The chest seemed to hold secrets, its surface marred by the passage of years. The whispers seemed louder here, urging her forward. They were not just sounds, but echoes of the past, voices of those who had once sought the chest's secrets. The air was thick with anticipation. With trembling hands, she reached for the latch. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, feeling the rough texture of rust. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the silent room. The chest creaked open, releasing a musty odor. The smell was a mix of aged wood and forgotten memories, a scent that spoke of long-lost tales and hidden treasures. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a collection of rusted keys of various sizes. Each key was unique, with intricate designs and patterns hinting at the locks they once opened, and a single sheet of parchment. The parchment was old, its surface cracked and fragile, as if it would crumble at the slightest touch. Its edges were brown and brittle, the ink faded to a rusty brown, almost like dried blood. The writing was barely legible, but it spoke of a forgotten era, a time when the chest was new and its secrets were yet to be discovered. She picked up one of the keys, feeling its weight in her hand. The metal was cold and heavy, the rust flaking off at her touch. She wondered what doors these keys had once opened, what secrets they had guarded. The parchment held a map, or perhaps a set of instructions. The lines and symbols were foreign, yet they seemed to call to her, urging her to decipher their meaning. She knew that this was just the beginning of her journey, a journey that would take her to places long forgotten, and uncover secrets that had been buried by time. Section 7. A shadowy figure. As Ella reached for the parchment, a cold gust of wind slammed the door shut. The sudden force made her jump, her heart skipping a beat. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the ancient document. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening and deepening around her. She spun around, heart pounding. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the disturbance. Every creak of the old house seemed amplified, echoing ominously in the silence. Standing in the doorway, a shadowy figure coalesced from the darkness. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life, forming a menacing presence that loomed over her. The figure was indistinct, its features obscured by the gloom, but its presence was undeniable. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light piercing the gloom. The light was unnatural, almost otherworldly, casting an unsettling glow that seemed to penetrate her very soul. She felt a chill run down her spine, her breath catching in her throat. A strangled cry escaped her lips. She tried to scream, but the sound was caught in her throat, coming out as a mere whisper. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing, but the fear was overwhelming, paralyzing her thoughts. The figure took a step closer, and the temperature in the room plummeted. She could see her breath misting in the air, the cold seeping into her bones. It was as if the very essence of the figure was draining the warmth from the room, leaving only an icy void. Terror froze her in place. She wanted to run, to escape, but her legs refused to move. It was as if she was rooted to the spot, held captive by the sheer force of her fear. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but her body remained motionless, trapped in the grip of terror. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, screaming her name, begging, threatening. They seemed to come from all directions, surrounding her, pressing in on her. The voices were a chaotic mix of pleas and threats, each one more desperate and menacing than the last. She clutched her head, trying to block out the noise, but it was relentless, echoing in her mind. Section 8. Trapped, panic seized her. Ella's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in the suffocating silence of the room. She could feel the walls closing in, the darkness pressing against her skin like a living entity. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself, but the fear was overwhelming. Ella scrambled back, her hand frantically searching for the doorknob. It was gone. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, disbelief washing over her. How could it just disappear? She pressed her ear against the door, hoping to hear something, anything on the other side. But there was only silence, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow her whole. The door was smooth, as if it had never been there. She was trapped. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She pounded on the door, her fists aching with the effort, but it was no use. The room seemed to mock her, its featureless walls offering no escape. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. The figure glided closer, its form solidifying, taking on the shape of a man, his face contorted in a silent scream. Ella's eyes widened in horror as the figure's features became clearer. It was as if the shadows themselves had come to life, forming a grotesque parody of a human being. The man's eyes were hollow, his mouth twisted in an eternal cry of agony. She could feel his pain, his despair, as if it were her own. Ella sank to the ground, her back against the cold stone wall. She could feel the chill seeping into her bones, a stark contrast to the burning fear that consumed her. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls pressing in from all sides. She was trapped with no way out. The parchment fluttered to the floor, the blood-red ink seeming to pulse faintly in the dim light. Ella stared at it, her mind racing. What did it mean? She reached out with a trembling hand, picking up the parchment. The words were written in a language she didn't understand. The message was clear. It was a warning, a promise of what was to come. She could feel the weight of it, the inevitability of her fate. The whispers swirled around her, a chorus of despair promising her a fate worse than death. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with their haunting melody. Ella covered her ears, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The whispers were inside her head, echoing in her mind. She could feel their cold breath on her skin, their words wrapping around her like a shroud. She was trapped with no escape, no hope, and no future. Section 9, whispers in the walls. The man lunged. Ella squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself, but the blow never came. She hesitantly opened her eyes. He was gone. But the whispers remained, echoing in the darkness, a constant reminder of her prison. Ella was trapped, not just within the walls of the hidden room, but within the walls of the house itself. The house that held her captive, its whispers her only company for eternity.